We're trying to train actual skills like physical, movement solutions and the skills. But then I think we're also training the ability to read the environment and like the ability to search for a solution in a given context.
What's the most efficient path to victory against this particular opponent?
He's dropping off for the choke here. We could see the finish. It's looking tight. Tight at Alpra.
Hey guys, welcome to the Everyday Jiu-Jitsu podcast. I'm your host, Matt Kwan. The Everyday Jiu-Jitsu podcast is everything you need to know about Jiu-Jitsu. Today I have a very special guest with me, my son, Jon Chan. Jon, what's up?
What's up? Long time listener.
Yes, I'm sure you are. Guys, before we get into it, please like, share, subscribe, leave a review, leave a comment if you can. Helps me grow the show, helps the algorithm. If you want to support the show, check out the links in the bottom. Jon Chan, Jon Chanaher, as I believe you go by nowadays. Legally, your nickname is now Chanaher.
It's been legally changed.
Yeah. Who are you?
I'm just I guess a middling jiu-jitsu practitioner. I'm a black belt under yourself, as you know. Very recent change. I don't know. I'm just someone who I guess started jiu-jitsu and a while back and just been training. And I recently opened, I guess, my own school. And that's all I've been doing is just kind of coaching and kind of trying to develop as a coach while also obviously still trying to get better as a practitioner. And that's pretty much it. Nothing special. I don't even know why I'm here, to be honest. But yeah.
Why are any of us here? I don't know. So Jon, the name of your gym is Nimbus Grappling and it is in Vancouver. Why did you start a gym?
Why did I start a gym? It's a good question. May have been a terrible mistake. No, I guess at the time, as you know, as I'm sure a lot of people who probably listen to this relate, I just like fell in love with jiu-jitsu, right? Like it's all I wanted to do. I remember being on like a road trip, like on a vacation. I did a road trip, in like 2019 out to the Blue Belt and I was like competing in San Diego and I was just like dropping into like a bunch of gyms on my way up and down the West Coast. And I had like some buddies with me. And I remember every day our routine would be like, I would just look up gyms wherever we're going and I would be like, okay, I'm going to train a noon class and then you guys go do whatever and then pick me up and we'll go get lunch. And like, we just do that every day. And then I remember just one morning, my buddy just like remarked, he's like, hey, Jon, it's kind of weird. Like you're on vacation and you're trying to replicate your day-to-day life at home. Whereas most people are on vacation trying to do like what they don't do. Right. And then I sort of, I don't know, it was like simple, but oddly profound. And it just made me realize like, I really loved the sort of lifestyle I was fortunate enough to like carve out for myself at home, which allowed me to train a lot at the time. And yeah, just being a bit older, I guess when I started jiu-jitsu, I was about to get married and then my wife, my wife was basically just like, you're doing so much jiu-jitsu. It's like, you either got to make this a career or it's like going to stay a hobby. Right. And, so I think I was just sort of at that point where I had to like to keep doing the amount of jiu-jitsu I was doing or more, which is what I wanted, I would have to like make some career out of it or it would have to, take a pretty big backseat to like other stuff in my life. So
The whole making money thing to survive.
Yeah. So,
how old are you and how long have you trained for?
I just turned 38 and, I've been training jiu-jitsu since 2017 as when I started. Yeah. I did some like, martial arts like kickboxing and stuff before that a little bit, but really just jiu-jitsu I started 2017.
I was in a similar thing where when I was still cooking and in my previous career I realized I wanted to make a career switch and I was like, well, my girlfriend at the time, then my wife now, was always like, man, you're always at jiu-jitsu, like, and I'm just like, oh, you're one of those, like, you're it's like a cliche in what we do where the woman almost doesn't want you to go. They want more attention for themselves. And I'm like, how can I get around this? Well, I could leave you or I could make jiu-jitsu or I could make jiu-jitsu my career. And if I make jiu-jitsu my career, then you can't complain about me going to work because I'm just going to jiu-jitsu and that's my work. And you had mentioned, like when you went on vacation, you just wanted to do jiu-jitsu all day. And that's funny you say that because when I go on vacation, even now, like I went to Mexico like a year ago. And when I went there, I remember like wanting to go back to work. Like we were coming back on the Monday. And normally when you come, from a regular career, you come home from a vacation, you're like, fuck, I got to go back to work. Oh, I'm dreading the Monday. And I remember just being like, man, I can't wait to go back to work because I haven't trained in 2 weeks. And so like, that's when you kind of know you really hit the lottery in terms of beating the system. When you can find something that you love to do, even like you said, it might be a horrible mistake. Why do you say that?
I just had a half jokingly, right? I think it's just because of my complete lack of business acumen. So, like, I think I'm pretty much like a white belt at like running a business, right? I just want to train and like, I enjoy teaching. I like conveying information and watching like people get better and being a part of that. But I think as far as like running a successful business, in the same way that like a black belt is not necessarily a great person, right? Like, but being good at jiu-jitsu or being good at teaching jiu-jitsu is not necessarily like necessarily means you have a successful business, right? So I'm still learning how to, I guess, optimize that side of it.
I think we all kind of are, we're kind of building the plane while it's in flight as gym owners and seeing what works for our peers and our competitors and trying to like mimic that. It's kind of like, it's just like anything, right? It's such a like systems thing, running a business, just like jiu-jitsu is. At Nimbus, I know you don't teach kids, right? You don't have a kids program.
Yeah, I'm trying to start a kids program, but yeah, the whatever I said about being not great with business like goes doubly for dealing with children. So that's definitely building the plane in flight for sure. But yeah, we started. It's just a matter of like getting, luring children into the building.
Yeah, I remember when I first started my kids program, and it was like, man, it's like it's depressing at times because you'll get like one kid that comes in, you're like, I have one kid. Like this is, you know what I mean? It's like
basically where I am right now. Yeah.
Yeah. You're like, you're giving your time and you're just not seeing the payoff. But I mean, that's kind of what this industry is at first, at least. Like everyone started that way with like no students, and it just takes time to build it up.
Yeah, I don't even mind if like the one kid. It's just that like I'm 3 times their size, and like I don't know how to like. There's only so much we can do. Yeah.
Yeah. You're trying to go like all John Danaher on them, and they're just like wanting playtime, basically.
Yeah. Basically. Yeah.
What's the emotion that goes inside of you when you think about going to kids class?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't dislike it. It's just more like, I think I'm more anxious, right? It's kind of more similar to like when I first started teaching. I had a lot of anxiety around, just like not knowing what I'm doing, like looking like an idiot, or just like, I want to like give value, right? Like I want like the students to have a good time. I want the kids to like have fun. I want them to learn as well and get better. And I think just like my confidence in my ability to like do that with like, I guess children at this point is not at the level that I feel confident I can teach adults, like self-interested adults, right, at this point. But that's just like, but like anything, that's how I started with adults too. Whenever I started teaching in the beginning, it was like, I felt so, there's a lot of imposter syndrome. There's a lot of like, the first time, because I started teaching, I think I was like a purple belt, right? And then I'd have rooms where I was in there with like brown belts and black belts, and I'm like, why are you listening to me?
Mm-hmm. For those who don't know, imposter syndrome it's like a phenomenon where, usually it's competent people. Usually people who feel that they have imposter syndrome aren't imposters because they have that self-awareness of, not wanting to be an imposter. But usually what it is it's where people think that their achievements or their skills are not like earned. They feel like they're an imposter. And when it comes to executing a task, like, running a kid's class or teaching a seminar or whatever, you start second guessing yourself and you start thinking about like, oh man, am I actually that good? Like, am I actually able to complete this task? And I've talked about this on the podcast before, and I find the best way to deal with it is to kind of remove your emotion from the reality of the situation. Like your emotions will tell you, hey, am I qualified for this? Am I able to complete this task? But the reality is that, it's just jujitsu. It's something you do every day. It's just another day of doing what we do. A lot of people when they teach kids classes, and I think kids classes have changed a lot over the years, especially when we have the information that we have now, and we have the ability to see what the top gyms are doing and how they're coaching their kids and adults as well. But a lot of the kids classes that we've seen traditionally are like daycare, basically, right? Like especially when we're talking about ages 5 to 9. That's when my program starts, is 5 to 9. A lot of this is like, we're going to do the animal drills down the mats. We're going to play a lot of like games to make sure that they don't hate coming to class and things like that. And there's not really an emphasis on live training. There's not an emphasis on like concepts or mechanics or anything like that. In a perfect world, let's say, Jon Chan, you have a class full of 20 kids now, which might sound terrifying. How do you want to run your kids' class? Let's say ages 5 to 9.
I mean, I don't know. I think, I guess I would say, in an ideal world, I would just want them to train like adults, really, right? Like, I look at your kids' class, like your kids' program. I don't know how you did it, but your kids like go to work. You know what I mean? Like like when before, when there's off time, like they're drilling. They're just like playing around with techniques, right? You're not just like running around. Well, I guess, from what I've seen, they're not all often just running around and like you need to like wrangle their attention to like get them to want to train. Whereas,
I do.
I don't know. I just feel like a lot of other kids classes I've observed in passing being kind of like what you mentioned, right? Like your class, it's sort of like daycare-esque kind of thing, whereas like a lot of your kids are just like, they're there to like get better at jiu-jitsu, which is cool. I don't really know. I guess because like I've mostly relied on like self-interested students, like those are the people I tend to connect with the best. Like I'm just really, I think maybe if I have a talent, my talent has always just been like verbal communication of like ideas to my students. And so I don't usually have to manipulate much on like the incentive end of like the student. Like usually they want to get better. And then that's what I work with. So with kids, I don't know to what degree you have to like foster that. Or I don't know, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I think you really get what you put in. Like if you want a culture where they're going to be, trying to learn and they care about improvement in techniques, your training methodology has to mimic that goal. If your training methodology is all games, not a lot of live training and things like that, and there's an emphasis on like promotions and things like this, then you're going to get a gym it reflects that, right? You're going to get kids who are always asking about the next promotion. Like at my gym, I've been vocal about it before. I don't do a lot of promotions for kids. In fact, we don't do all of the colored belts for kids. We only do one belt. Like we only do the flat. You're just a gray belt. You're a yellow belt. You're an orange belt. You're a green belt. So what that means is there's far less promotions. Normally you get like a stripe almost every month if your attendance are good, if you want to follow the IBJJF system. But for my program, you'd be lucky if you get promoted twice a year. That would be like a very dedicated, consistent student. And I do it this way so that they don't get so fixated on things like promotions, and also so that they get used to the idea of things not coming often. Like they're not getting constantly rewarded for being there. No, the reward is that you're getting good at jiu-jitsu and you're learning like the discipline, and you're learning to appreciate that stripe. When you do get it, it's like, oh man, like this means a lot. You know what I mean? And when you become an adult, stripes happen, once a year, maybe twice a year if you're super, super consistent, right? And you're really excelling. And so I almost think that that's the better culture to provide for the kids' class. And like basically for me, we'll talk about what we came to talk about here in like just a minute, which is task-focused games and scaling games. like I started introducing my teens to the scaling model that we're going to discuss. Dude, they fucking love it. Like they think it's super great. And we were discussing this the other day, is like, as a coach, it makes things super easy because you don't have to, you're not constantly changing the timer. You're letting the rounds go longer, and they're flip-flopping, changing positions on their own. And it's leading themselves to question why things are working and why things aren't working. So it's, I think like the task focused games approach to kids is so much better than, the, what would they call it? Coupling drills? Is it like coupling training where you're doing like, isolated movements and isolated, is that what that's called?
No, I think you might be referring to, I guess, what some people call information processing, but I'm not really sure.
I'm not up on my eco lingo, so any eco person here is just going to be cringing. So
I'm not like an authority on any of this stuff. I don't know the lingo as well either, but I think of like the traditional model, right? Like in information processing is just the idea that you have like a model in your head of like an ideal sort of a movement solution, like an ideal technique or a way something could work. And you practice it like a million times, and then you try to like plug and play it into like live, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the task focused games where you put a kid in a situation, and I'm using kids as an example because I believe that adults, usually they're there because they want to learn, they're interested in learning, whereas a kid might not even care. They might just be like, I don't even want to fucking be here. My mom and dad told me I have to come here. So it's like, how are we going to approach that student? Like where they don't even have a natural passion or interest in the sport. And putting them in a situation where it's like, okay, now I want you to just keep your feet in front of your opponent as they try and run around your legs. Go. And then they're like, wait, what? Like I can lose this? Okay. Oh man, I lost. Like, what the hell? What? Okay. I have to. And then you just like, I found when I switched from a traditional model of kids classes to the task focused games, there was a period of like, maybe 2 or 3 months where kids were like, this was really hard on them. They were like, man, like this is not easy. But then they become conditioned to the constant live training. And then, they go into competitions and they're just like, they're doing awesome because they've been in those live situations so much. They've gotten so much live experience, that repetition without repetition, right?
Totally. Yeah, for sure.
Let's talk about scaling. And, I think at this point we all know what task focused games are. Actually, it was one of our training partners, Ethan, who trains with both of us. He was the one who first introduced me to this scaling idea. And I think it was inspired from you. And I think you got it from, was it the Eco Summit where Greg was talking about this?
Yeah, I basically just took something that Greg was saying. I think it was in that video on YouTube from the Ecopalooza sort of summit thing that they were doing. And it's just, yeah, the idea of, you could scale, like, I guess scaling task focus, right? So like in a long round, like, so usually, I do like 10-minute rounds. So when we do like, a task based, round, you can scale the task focus itself, or you can scale like the position, which is what I tend to do more of. So the example that we did, was like, and I think it's the example in the video. So it's like you're on the back, you start on the back seatbelt with like 2 hooks, right? The back player is trying to, you can do whatever you want, right? But like, let's say, for example, you're trying to organize around just getting your strangle arm, like hand on the back of their strap so that you can eventually walk up like a rear naked. And that's sort of like your win condition, let's say, right? Front person, you're trying to escape however you want to define that, back to the floor, turn and face your opponent, whatever, right? And then the whole idea is, what I do is, I guess we flip-flop offense, defense every time there's a reset so that both people kind of like have turns doing offense, defense and go back and forth. But we scale the starting position, where if the offensive player was successful in getting the win the first time, the next time that they're on offense, they're just going to start in a slightly, I guess, like further back position. So in this case, they would start seatbelt on the back, but then with no hooks, right? And then they would have the same goal. They don't have to stay with no hooks. They can like go get hooks after, but like they just start in that position. And then if they're successful with that goal again, then the next time they start in like, on top of someone's turtle with a seatbelt on the back. And then they have the same goal of getting that rear naked, position. And, yeah, that's, I think, the exact game that like Greg used in the video. And then we played it. We really liked it. And so I've been trying to applying that format to a lot of different, positions.
Very cool. Yeah, we played that game last night. It's awesome. So that game specifically, it appears to me that the win condition being, getting a rear naked locked in, but not finishing it. What, so that game is designed for the skill of getting the breakthrough to the rear naked, if I'm not mistaken, right? Like it's not about finishing it, because finishing the strangle wasn't a win condition. It was more about just getting your hands in place. What do you think the benefit of that is? Like, what's the benefit of just getting the hands in place as opposed to finishing the submission?
For sure. I think, again, I don't think it's not like a dogmatic thing where it's like you have to do it that way. I think I can't speak for him, but I would assume Greg also he's also said things like, don't just copy I want you guys to create your own games. I think it's really up to the coach and what you're trying to get the person where you're trying to get the athlete to get good at in that moment. So the benefit of that specifically, I would say would be organizing everything around the key components of acquiring a rear naked strangle. Cause I think the vast majority of time that you get a rear naked strangle on people, you're most likely going to finish. Right. And, you could probably have separate games that work around the strangle, but there's certain positions, I guess you could argue, that are I don't know, for lack of a better term, are extremely linear, right? Once you get here, there's only so many things. There's not as much variability, right? So once you get there, you don't really need as much information to finish it. And say you have beginners, day one beginners who have no idea what they're doing. Maybe you could do a game where it's compress and see if you can get the strangle in different ways, right? That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But I think anyone that's relatively seasoned, you don't really need to teach them how to do rear naked choke. You just, once you get there, they kind of know what to do. So I think the two benefits would be if that come to me immediately would be just one, we're not thinking about the strangle. We're just organizing around the main thing that's going to basically get us 80% of the way there. And then from there, we're likely going to succeed, right? So the more important thing is how do I get my arms around there? And then the other thing I think would just be the use of time, right? The amount of time that you would spend trying to finish versus just do another rep of this skill. I think, yeah, just being more time efficient.
It's almost like you're just isolating the hand fighting that leads to the breakthrough of the arm positioning that could potentially lead to the strangle. Whereas you could build another game where it's okay, now your goal is to finish it.
Absolutely.
Now your goal is to look for, a rear triangle, or now your goal is to finish by attacking the arm. It's really, the great thing about these games is you can kind of customize them to focus on whatever task the coach wants the athlete to improve at, which is super cool. What do you think? So when I first became aware of these task focused games, this ecological approach, I think it was over a year ago now. I'm not sure when I first heard about it. We were doing primarily timed individual games. So be okay, you attack me for 3 minutes, then with switch, I'll go 3 minutes. Right. And so what do you think the benefits are to that approach versus flip-flopping, where it's more of a longer round and we flip-flop when one of us wins or loses?
So yeah, I try to as best I can, because I really like the format, to flip-flop my athletes whenever possible. There's some games where it's not really, it makes more sense sometimes to just do one person for 3 minutes and the other person for 3 minutes. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I still think you benefit a lot, and you get a lot of, I think the benefit of that would be, I guess, you just get a lot of shots on goal, successively. You just get a lot of repetition at trying to solve the same problem over and over again. And I think that's great. I think it's a really great way to do things. And especially if there's it's kind of rare, but if there's two continuous games for both players, usually I have one terminal game at least, and then one versus continuous game for two terminal games. But very seldomly do I have two continuous goals for both people. But if that were the case, then I think, yeah, that makes sense to do for time and then switch.
Right.
But the benefit I think of flip-flopping is one, I just think, I think the main thing is for me is you kind of, the way I describe it is you get inspired by your partner, right? There's things that people do to you that you would not have thought of, and you kind of observe them solving the same problem on you in different ways than you ever would have thought. And I think that's a really helpful, while you're searching for solutions, that's such a useful thing. It's helped me a lot. And then for me, I think the big thing is that there's enough time for both of you to go back and forth. So you get to experiment with a lot of different solutions.
Yes, and I actually find it like I said earlier, it's easier to coach because there's not you're not constantly messing with the clock. The clock is running longer, and people are like literally self-organizing. They're like you said, they're inspired by their partner. It's like when you're doing one position for 3 minutes and then your partner goes for 3 minutes. Like, yes, the workload might be more even, I guess, in terms of both of you getting a taste of the same position, but the downside is you're more tunnel vision. Like you're all offense, 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 and then you switch and now you're defense, defense, defense. Where I think there's a thought-provoking quality to having it offense, defense, offense, defense, offense, defense. And so you really have to like think about what you're doing a lot more. And when you're watching your training partner and how they're approaching the situation, like if they have success in the round in the previous go and you don't, you're going to ask yourself like, hey, what are they doing that is giving them the success that I can't seem to reach? You know, and I find that it really does make you like ask yourself those questions. Like you said the other day when we were chatting about this, like there's more self-inquiry when you have that back and forth as opposed to just timed rounds, even though that may seem like the time is more evenly distributed.
Yeah, I don't get too hung up on like the need to have it evenly distributed, right? Just because like I think you're kind of trying to solve the same problem just from like different perspectives. So like the defense will inform the offense will inform the defense. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with like working the defense to the, you know what I mean? Like if someone is stuck in one side of the position for much longer, it's like, it just shows that there's like development being made there, right? And like that's something to work on at the moment. And I think that's fine, you know? And yeah, I think just like you said, like it sort of keeps people more engaged. It kind of keeps, I think it's easier to sort of zone out and lose focus. I think especially with the task focus games, I think when you're new to it, it can become it's very easy initially to lose sight of your focus and just start sparring. Like, you know, and I think we're trying to actually we're training like two things at the same time, right? We're trying to train, actual skills, like physical, you know, movement solutions and the skills. But then I think we're also training the ability to read the environment and like the ability to search for a solution in a given context. Right. And I think the more, and it's sort of, yeah, again, like I said, just keeps people more, I guess, locked into like what they're doing.
Even adults have issues with constraints. Like I'll be like, okay, your job is to try to take the back with 2 hooks, and if you do that, you win. And then I look around and people are fucking arm barring each other, they're strangling each other. I'm like, you fucking idiot. Like listen to the instructions. And that's my biggest challenge with the task focused games with kids, because kids listen even less. And the younger they get, the less ability they have to listen. Every day I'll be like, okay, guys, this is a free roll. Start from the feet. We're doing IBJJF rules. Submissions are on. Okay, let's go. 1, 2. We clap, and then I get someone's hands up. Are submissions on? Like sometimes it'll be like there's 1 minute left in the round, and someone asks me if submissions are on, and I'm just like, like how can you not listen, right? And the thing is that people do zone out, right? They do zone out, and especially kids. So you do have to just. The biggest thing when you're a coach, you know, is to sort of just when you're playing this eco task focused game type approach is getting people to stay within the game. And this is something that Greg told me in our first interview was, you know, just make sure that they're staying within the constraints of the game. Like, because one person's not expecting to get strangled and the other guy just fires a strangle in just out of instinct. It's like, well, you're not really like, you're not trying to do the task that the coach has laid out for you. Right. And so if you're doing eco with kids, that's the number one thing is like, you almost have to do that secondary training of getting them to listen, you know, like obviously they're coming in to learn jiu-jitsu and respect and all that stuff, but like they also need to learn how to learn. They need to learn how to follow the instructions so that when they're put in a game, they have the specific task. They're not just like seeing red and doing what they normally do. And you have to watch them and be like, no, like I said, don't do that. Like just stick right here. You already won the game like a minute ago. You know what I mean?
I also sorry. Yeah. No, I was just to say, I also think though, I guess very limited experience with like teaching kids, but I also think though that like kids or, they provide like they tend to look at things a bit differently than adults in a way that I think can be beneficial to the game. Like basically they try to find loopholes, right? Like they try to like break the game, which I actually think is like a benefit. I think it sort of explores the boundaries of your game, and I think it helps refine your game because like basically you just have to like it sort of teaches you, I think, as a coach to it incentivizes you to be clearer, more concise, right? And sort of think about like better parameters of the game. So whereas like I think sometimes adults, especially if they're adults with like some limited like jiu-jitsu experience, like your blue belts or something like that, they have like a preconceived notion of like how all the techniques could look or like what it could be like. And then you're just like, okay, hook your feet inside between the knees, like any way you want. I don't really care how you do it. Just like find the inside space. But they're like, do you want me to do X guard or do you want me to do like Ashley? Right? And like, it doesn't really matter. So I find that they can be a bit more rigid and like not really explore the space in the way that will maybe benefit them more. I don't know, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. You use the term breaking the game, which is very, very interesting. And I think anyone who's a coach who's coming up with their own task focused games kind of can run into this from time to time. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah. So, I think I think we have to remember that, especially a lot of us who don't know what we're doing, like myself, we are also in the same way that the athlete is developing like their skills and they're like doing a lot of trial and error with like their abilities, and then movement solutions for certain problems. We are trial and erroring our games, right? So like I might be sitting on my desk, like writing out, like, thinking of, oh yeah, this is what, a certain technique consists, like this is what an arm mark consists of. These are the invariants. And like, I'm going to make people do this by, influencing like their decision making and then creating these like parameters of the game. And then I, get them to do it. And they do things that I never even considered, or they're just moving in ways that I didn't want. And they're trying to solve it in ways that I know will be, and then so then it just feels like, oh, this game doesn't actually incentivize the behaviors that I wanted or that I thought. And then so I just have to I have to go back and think more about like how to refine the game a bit better, right? I guess. I don't know if that makes any sense there.
Like kind of like if I'm like, okay, I always see this one with kids because kids are afraid to lose. And I'll be like, okay, this player is going to stand in the other player's guard. He's going to like approach the open guard and try and control the feet and keep disconnection of the guard player's feet and try to like flank the legs, right? Sometimes I say pass, sometimes I don't. Doesn't matter. They always try to fucking pass because they don't listen. And when I do that, the bottom player is trying to knock top player to their butt. Usually I encourage in a no-gi situation, 2 feet inside, right? And what you always get is the top player just like gingerly walking around the guard and not approaching the guard. And they're like, well, you told me not to get knocked on my butt. So like, I'm going to like hang back here. And I'm like, yeah, but you're evading. Now we're doing an action that in a real situation would get you penalized. Like you have to engage the guard player. And so like, they're trying to like scam the system by not losing. Or sometimes, dude, and you'd be shocked how often this happens. Same game. The top player literally just runs circles and giggling like an idiot and not even facing the guard player, but literally just like running. And I'm like, whoa. Like this is not the game. You have to approach the guard player, like try to grab their legs and throw them to the side. You know what I mean? And they're like, oh, okay. And then they fall over and they're like, well, this sucks. I just lost. Like I wasn't losing when I was just running around in a circle. You know what I mean?
I think that totally, yeah, again, like that will totally like, as a coach, that makes you think, well, like, okay, I have to like fix the rules, right? And then so like with that example, like when we have that, like I noticed when I started doing basically that, like to get around the leg, like control the feet, get around the leg, get to the waist, right? People were just like not making contact, trying to like beat their way out, just like run around in circles.
Yeah.
But then like if something as simple as I guess so like adding like constraints or like adding like rules, right? Like you control their feet, and then you have to like
you have to control their feet.
You have to control their feet, keep their feet off you, and get as close to them as possible without letting them like connect to you, right? So then they're not allowed to just like hang back, stuff like that. So, and I think that just like refines the tasks and the goals, right? And just kind of backtracking a bit, like something I think you mentioned earlier about like yeah, trying to create a game and then like having people just do like all sorts of like, like lose focus or like not remember what they're doing or like do completely different things. One thing that I guess I try to make a habit of now, I'm trying to get better at like being more concise and like being clear with the rules. But one thing I've tried to get into the habit of is like the last thing I want my athletes to say before we like clap and like go off to do our thing are like the goals. Like, so I'll explain whatever I need to explain and I'll explain the goals. I'll explain why and all this stuff. But then the last words I want them to hear are like, remember, one, do this, two, do that, three, get there, right? And then it's like, there we go, right? So there's like less confusion. Hopefully, I find that to be somewhat helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I remember the only thing I remember was like a Seinfeld reference, but that was well after.
A lot of Asians like Seinfeld from my experience, but
Yeah,
I'm really
I remember
excited.
you saying that to me before.
It's because they don't understand sarcasm and Jewish humor.
Yeah, that's fair.
They just like my Chinese grandma would be like, one of my aunts, if she saw her, she'd be like, "You're getting fat." It was like just blunt honesty. um, okay, well we'll get back in. I'll ask you about some more questions about scaling.
Sure.
So, what do you think the benefits are of like the scaling model as opposed to segmented individual games? So instead of being like, okay, game one is this task, go, then we break, then or both we flip flop, or both people get a chance, and then okay, game two is this model or this game, sorry, go. Rather than saying, okay, these are the three positions you're going to work from in the scaling model. If you win, move on to the next position. If you don't win, stay in this current position or whatever. Like, what are the benefits to that scaling approach as opposed to each individual position in a game?
I find, well, I mean, I still do both. Like, I still have like smaller slices, I guess, base games where we're just like working on very specific skills. But um, I think ultimately our goal is to, um, have practice that looks as representative of like the game as possible, right? And I think the idea is like even the more advanced your students become, I think more and more the practice should just look like situational sparring. But insofar as we're developing like specific skills and like building the toolbox, I think that's when we use like the skill based games, right? Um, and so what I like about the scaling model, whether you're scaling the position, which is what we talked about, or you can also scale like the task focus itself, um, is that to me it feels like almost like more organic. Like there's like almost like an invisible hand or like natural equilibrium that people find, right? So like two partners, and it does really well with like I guess a differential in like skill or like ability, right? So like a partner that's better than their partner can still get work done, can still be productive. And so can like their partner who has less skill, right? It's like if you're spending the entire time working from the first position or working for the first pass, like that's perfectly fine. That's your skill, right? If you're someone that finds that it's kind of too easy to like get that first task and you can reliably like get their win from a certain position, then you kind of move on to the next step that it should be inherently a bit more challenging. And you just kind of find it kind of, I think, naturally or organically spotlights an area that is more relevant to your development at that moment. And you can kind of have this happen throughout the room with like all the different people all at once without really having to manage it. And so I think that's like the biggest benefit I've found.
Do you think that there's an issue with if you're doing the scaling model? So let's say we have like three positions, right? Do you think there's an issue with changing the win conditions at a certain step? Because I was doing a game where I had the first position was the armbar position, and your goal was to escape the armbar. And then the next situation, the goal is the top lock position, and your goal is to like escape the top lock. But then you're still in the closed guard. Like there's no submission attempt in play at that point if you clear your shoulder and you're out of the top lock and you're in closed guard. And I was like, well, should that be the win condition, or should the win condition be to escape the closed guard? And then the third position was neutral closed guard. And I was thinking, because I was kind of backtracking the armbar from the closed guard position, but I found that, and it sounded great in my head, but then when I taught it, I was like, okay, I think the win conditions are changing here in between the positions, because the first situation is like a fully locked submission. And then the next position is like a bad position, but you can escape that. And if you do escape that and you go to a neutral closed guard, the next position is neutral closed guard. I felt that I wanted to make the win conditions go further than just escaping the submission threat. You now have to escape the closed guard as well. So do you think that that's an issue, or is it better to have like a congruent task throughout all 3 scaled games?
Yeah. So like, I mean, I don't think I'm confident enough to say like definitively one way or the other. Like, I'm sure just like everything, I don't think there's like necessarily a right or wrong so much as like, it's just a trade-off, like with anything, right? Like, what are you gaining and what are you, giving up to get something done? So I think it all just should be centered around the idea of what is it in this very moment you're trying to get your athlete to get better at, right? Because I think it's very common. And I think this is the thing that a lot of people, I think it's very common for a lot of people to kind of get hung up on the difference between situational sparring and like some of these skill games. And I think so, for similar reasons of like, sorry, I'm kind of losing my train of thought, but like, I think it's like too much information. So the reason I like to keep the goal the same throughout the different positions is because I just think I'm trying to minimize the amount of information I want my athlete to think about. Like, I just don't want them thinking too much about like, what was I supposed to do or what was the goal here? Like, I just want them to look at what's in front of them and just be like, oh yeah, Jon said get under the arm. Okay, just try to get under the arm, right? Stuff like that. So for that reason is why I probably keep the goal the same. But what you can also do is like, from the same position, scale the task focus instead. Like, you don't have to scale the position, right? So like, for example, if you're in a cross side pin on top, and then you're giving, and it's like a beginner class or something, and you're giving them the goal of like getting an underhook, right? So it's like, get under the arm and secure it, right? That's your goal. If you get that, you win, right? But then you could also scale the task focus where it's like, if you guys find that you're getting here very reliably, it's like almost too easy, then your goal to win will become getting like both underhooks, right? Like, you're not allowed to win until you get both of them. Right. And then, and so on, and be like, okay, now get both and like get into mount or something. Right. So I think you could do it that way as well. And I think it's just about not adding too many dimensions of like complexity for me, because I just think the simpler, the better.
Mm-hmm. I tend to agree with that. Keeping things simple is very good. How do you know when your games are effectively designed?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have no idea. I just,
No, that's why I'm asking you.
Yeah.
I also don't have any idea.
Yeah. I said, I send it to, sometimes I'll send it to people who I think know better than me and then see what they think. Like, we talked about how I created what I thought was like this meaniest game. And then I sent it to, both, my mentor, Rob Bernacki, and I sent it to Greg Souders to see what he thought. And they both were like, yeah, there's no good. So you never know.
Let's talk about that game for a sec. Let's talk. Hold on. Yeah, we're talking about the chess game, right?
Yeah.
Okay, explain to the people. This is a Jon Chan patent. Explain to them what the chess game is.
So this is my magnum opus. So I was the problem I had, or the problem I was trying to solve, I guess, was like getting into the offensive cycle, or like staying in the offensive cycle and sort of prioritizing it, because I felt like my disposition and my temperament, like I was constantly willing to be defensive, even though I wasn't getting finished. But I just felt like, yeah, in competition, it's just no good. I need to be more offensive, right? So one thing I came up with was, what we started doing this for a while was like, we use the test clock. So for those who I guess are unaware, test clock, I guess the way it works is there's two timers that are on like one clock. And they're set, we set them to like the same time. So let's say like 3 minutes each, right? And then there's like a button that will sort of favor one side or the other, right? So then if you press the button onto one clock, that clock will start counting down and the other clock will not move. And then when you change you toggle the button, the other clock will start counting down and then the initial clock will freeze, right? So then it's just basically for speed test, I guess, like you have to win without running out of time, right? So what we were trying to do is like, we would start a clock. It required like 3 people per match, but you have 2 people have a match or a situation, whatever, right? And then one like referee with the clock. And the idea is once somebody gets into an offensive cycle, you run the clock on the defensive player. So then they're running out of time. And then the only way for them to stop their own clock and run their opponent's clock is to get into the offensive cycle. So it led to a lot of like exciting and honestly a lot of fun exchanges where it'd be really intense and like you saw it's like in Street Fighter when you're at the last end of your health bar, but then you run like an insane combo and like kill someone completely, right? So basically people would have like 10 seconds left, 5 seconds left on their clock, but they get a reversal and then they're on top. All of a sudden the other person has a whole minute to count down, but then the person on top has to be able to stay in offense for a minute to win. And then so, yeah, it was a lot of fun.
It's a cool idea.
Yeah. Thank you. I was really happy with it. I was really proud of it. And it was a lot of fun to play, but and then I basically thought it was a really good idea. I sent it to Rob to see what he thought, and he had some criticisms of it, which I think are very fair criticisms that I ultimately do agree with him. And then I basically messaged Greg and explained the game and sort of told him to paraphrase what Rob had told me, and then Greg sort of agreed with what Rob said.
And what was that?
I kind of scrapped my game. I think the main criticism was that they saw it as like far too intense. Like, at least okay. So I'll start. And if I'm getting you wrong, Rob, you can, correct me, calling you. But like, from what I remember, I think the main criticism was that the game will inherently foster way too much intensity, and it will prevent the athletes from developing any skill, as they will not be able to like be creative or fluid, or it's just going to make people sloppy and like just way too like, I guess, like in the same way you can get, I guess, overwhelmed by the intensity and competition. It's kind of like you just kind of freak out and like start making very bad decisions. Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
I agree that is the effect that results from the game. I guess you could make an argument that you're trying to inoculate yourself to this condition.
Well, that's what I'm saying is like, if you're a competitor, you're going to deal with those stresses. So like, wouldn't you want to put yourself in intense situations where like, you're down and you have to catch up or whatever?
Yeah, that was my initial thinking, and that's sort of like what I was, I guess, trying to do with it. And then I guess it just maybe depends on your thoughts around, like, I think Rob's of the mind that ultimately, like, what we're trying to do is just get better at jiu-jitsu, and like, if you are skilled enough, then that's what you rely on in competition. Like, and I think the way he explained it to me was like, he thinks, we could try to make competition more like our practice and not have our practice more look like our competition, if that makes sense. So like, not wrap up the intensity of our practice, but like try to compete in a way that like, relies on our skill that we spend all time developing. And I think, I don't want to misquote anyone. I think I've heard in passing, like Greg mentioned stuff about like, I think people have asked him, like, do you do comp classes, like rules and stuff like that? And I think he just said like, no, we're focused on engaging the body, right? Like, we're focused on the skills that sort of make up all the jiu-jitsu, right? So I think that's sort of the focus. And I think if that's the focus, I can see where they're coming from, and that, this doesn't really facilitate that optimally. But I do, I don't know. I'm open to the idea that it's still helpful in some ways, like in terms of like inoculating yourself to intensity and stuff like that. Or
do you play that game at Nimbus anymore?
It's been a long time since we played it. I still have like the clocks and everything, but no, the last time we played it was probably sometime last year. But we spent like a good while playing it like every week. Yeah.
And you would have a third party operating the clock as two guys are doing this like mock match.
Yeah.
And so when you play that game, do points matter at all? Or are you literally just trying to win by killing the other clock?
You're really just trying to win by killing the other clock in sort of like its initial conception.
I guess if you're getting points, you are dominating.
Yeah,
offense.
You're offense, right? So like and there's a lot of gray area, but like the main idea for it originally was like, I just wanted to solve this problem of like staying in the defensive cycle. That's like all I really cared about at the time. And so I just felt like this was the thing. This was just like designed around like, you got to get into the offense. And like, that was sort of what it was designed around. Yeah. We've done versions of it. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just said we altered it a bit. We did versions of it where it's like, we would run the clock, based on points instead of like offensive cycle, because offensive cycle, you could argue, can be like a bit ambiguous to like, how does the ref sort of identify
it's perception?
Yeah, it's perception, right? But I found that it was, close enough. Like it, there's definitely a degree of like I felt like the gray area is not too dissimilar from like the gray area of like refs making calls, right? Like, I found it worked out.
Like, also, you could look at that and say, well, is it is it necessarily making things more intense? Maybe when somebody gets into the offense, it could become intense because the person on defense is going to be defending hard, but like there's always that neutral like grip fighting where it's like even. And that's not always necessarily an intense portion of the match. That's actually usually quite fluid and relaxed. And then when someone gets a breakthrough, that's when things can ramp up and somebody becomes more desperate and the other person doesn't. I've actually never played this game, but to me it sounds super cool. And it actually, like, to me it sounds like it would be effective in terms of mimicking the stress of competition. Because you set out with that game with the goal to get yourself into offense more under stressful situations, like that was like the goal of the game. Do you think that for you and your own personal experience, did it achieve that goal, or did you perceive any improvement using that game?
I mean, it's all, who knows, right? It's all anecdotal, but like, I felt what it did was it helped me, I guess, in some way feel more comfortable with like the intensity. I will say that in the round, I definitely felt like I was sloppier, like kind of like what was Rob was saying. Like my, technique was kind of going out the window a bit. But I do think it definitely helped me feel more comfortable with like being in intense situations. But that was one of the things that we also sort of like as a secondary thing we were trying to solve at that point too. Cause like me and like some of my training partners at the time we're not like typical, alpha type bros, right? So we're not, my disposition is like very, not very combative, but conducive to like combat. So we're just, constantly being overwhelmed by like very physical, like competition, right? So we're just trying to like, find ways to like get used to it. And like, and I think that it did help me in that way. I was reflecting on this recently just because we had talked about it the other day. And I wonder if just increasing the time, I think one of the things, especially that Greg was criticizing about it was that the time scale was too short. Cause I had sort of arbitrarily said like, oh yeah, we'll set the clock like 3 minutes each or something like that. Right. And he was like, oh, that's way too little time. Like you're not going to, it's going to be way too intense. But I think there's nothing that says like, I wonder if I think people sort of misunderstand like 3 minutes isn't really 3 minutes because it's like, it pauses and runs and the other clock goes. So it's like really like 6 minutes, right? I mean, unless one person dominates for 3 minutes, but,
sorry, the match ends like in this game. The match doesn't end when the timer goes, right? The match ends when the chess clock is run out. Is that true?
Yeah. The game ends obviously if somebody gets submitted, but like the game also ends if, the first person who runs out of time loses basically, right? So you just have to stay in offense longer. But I think if like we extend the time, I wonder if that will, if that will like help make things like even out a bit more, and people won't be as panicked until like the last moment, which is like I think fair.
You mean extend like the time on each chess side? Like extend the health bar is essentially what you're saying.
Basically, just give a longer health bar, so that you're not going into it with like, oh, okay, I only have like this much time to work, and like you actually think you have a lot more time. I think that might actually maybe helpful. Maybe we'll revisit it. If you want to come through, we could.
Dude, I to me the game sounds awesome. At least in theory, it sounds super cool.
Yeah.
Fuck Rob and Greg. They don't win anything. They don't compete. Who gives a fuck what they have to say? No. And I guess like the person who's operating the clock, they're signaling when someone's in the offense. They're like offense blue. Like
so you're like, fuck, now I'm in defense.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. We definitely we'd let the athletes know for sure. Yeah.
I guess the only downside that I see of the game is because it takes a lot of resources. Like it takes a third person to operate the clock. It takes the clocks. It's going to be hard to do that when you have a room of like 20 people and getting everyone to fight at once. But in terms of like, let's say the goal of the game doesn't even have to be the chess game. It could be any game. It's like, let's say the goal of the game isn't skill acquisition. The goal of the game is making decisions under stress and dominating the offensive cycle. Like that is a legit goal for any competitor. So I could see that game serving that task focus, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
How do you avoid making games that could create bad habits?
It's a good question. I think, well, I think it's a couple things. Again, I also don't really know what I'm talking about. But I think, the way I see it, there's a lot of reliance on, there's a necessity for the coach to have a lot of like information, right? So like, I think like knowledge, right? Knowledge about and everything like that. Like, I think, is required to inform the design of the game. So where some people may misunderstand, or maybe I misunderstand the, the philosophy or whatever, right? But um, I don't think it's the case where you just like let people discover on their own. Like, people are trying to like reinvent jujitsu, like that whole misunderstanding about this stuff, I think. Um, I think it's important for a coach to know enough about the thing they're teaching, or the situation, the positioning, to be able to see that someone is going down a path of like, well, this is not going to serve them. Like, this is just a very bad habit or a very bad idea. And maybe they're just not being punished for it because the person they're going with isn't good enough to like make them pay for it. Then I think as a coach, it's probably your job to step in and sort of and find a way to either change the design of the game such that they get punished for doing that, right? Like that movement solution no longer becomes viable, or at worst case scenario, like you can't figure out how to do that and just like add a constraint. Like, you're not allowed to do, like, you have to now do this without coming down to your knees or like something. You have to keep them pinned without doing that, right? So I think it's the job of the coach to sort of add blockers, like whenever people are veering off path too far, and then just kind of redirecting them back towards what they want. And I think it's also, I don't know, I guess it's like a different school of thought. Like, I think there's some people, like the traditional model, I guess, because you believe that there's an optimal way for a mechanic or for moves to happen. The belief is that there's like a supreme, like ultimate way to do an armbar, and therefore we should just teach that version of it to everyone. And the goal is to do it perfectly, as close to perfect as you can every time. Whereas I suppose if you, buy into this other way of thinking, the idea is that, it's going to be different for everyone. And so I think it's just sort of a longer arc of progress. I think like the idea is you stabilize like a solution, like you get someone to be able to successfully perform an armbar, right? On people on the floor that they're training with. And then you sort of you sort of destabilize the system, right? So then you just add more variability, get them to do it against better people, get them to do it in ways that will make their solution harder to pull off without, and then they have to re-stabilize that system. So it's just like a constant cycle of like, I guess, guided trial and error. If that, I don't know, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Last question about games. Is there issues with like making games too specific? Like, do you think that that's a thing where you can make games way too specific and then after you're like, well, that didn't turn out the way that I wanted to?
Totally. What do you mean by, I guess, too specific? As in, I guess, do you have an example or?
Like the whatever game you're making, like the constraints limit. I guess I'm almost answering my own question. Where the constraints limit the athlete from doing a behavior that they might do in a normal situation. Like, let's say, let's say we're playing from, I don't know, a seated guard. And you're like, okay, your goal is to get into ashigarami, but you're not allowed to heist up or something like that. And it's like, okay, I can understand why, or let's say you're teaching a wrestler, right? And you're telling the wrestler who's really good at wrestling up, like the wrestler could wrestle up on a single or a double almost at will. But you were like, no, I want this guy to get good at his guard. Like, I want him to get into ashigarami and things like that. So you're not allowed to heist up. You're not allowed to wrestle up. You're just playing guard. So you put that constraint, right? But then you find it's like, well, it's hard for him to get in to the legs when he's not level changing, because when he's level changing, now he's creating a reaction that could potentially allow him to pull his opponent back into guard. And then at the end, you're like, that actually had like a negative effect because you almost suppressed his natural ability, and you suppressed a dilemma that could lead a path to the legs. Do you know what I mean? Do you think that is like is that a real issue?
I think potentially, but like I think a couple. I guess we're maybe talking about a few things. Like I think on one hand, in that I know it's just like a made up example, but like I guess in that example, um, it depends on like if you are specifically trying to get your athlete to get good at entering ashi without height, like if there's a reason why you're taking heisting away, right? Because you can allow him to, because you're saying the heisting can create a dilemma. So you can allow them to heist as long as the goal is still to get Ashley, right? Or like whatever, however you want to describe Ashley, right? Like, wrap your legs around the hips, while staying tight to his ankle, whatever, right? However you describe Ashley, but like if the goal is the same and you just don't constrain how they get there, I think you could do that, right? But if your goal, I think again, it comes back to like what skill am I trying to get my athlete to get good at right now? And I think that's the thing that we run into a lot. I do myself is like, again, the sort of difference between situational sparring and like developing a specific skill. I think there's a tendency or a desire for us to always try to allow for every opportunity, like every possible option that could happen from here. It's like, oh, I want him to like be able to pull the Ashley, but I know you could also like do this. There's like all these different move options you could do from here, and you kind of want your game to encompass everything. I think then that's why things end up turning into just situational sparring, right? Because we're scared that like, oh, if I get them to only do one thing and ignore the other one, they won't get good at that, or we'll get too television on this thing, or like they won't be realistic, right? Obviously we want the game to be as representative of like the real game as possible, so you try to make it feel as realistic as you can. But I think it's okay to sort of like really specify like which skill we're trying to work on, and then just do them separately. And then when you actually spar the position, that's when the self-organization happens. But what you're trying to do with the skill game is I think you're just trying to give them an experience in the position. Like you just want them to feel all the nuances and the feedback and sort of engage with the position, even if they're unable to successfully meet the goal of the game. They're still getting information. I think that's the key. Like you want them to get information about the environment. I don't know. I'm just rambling.
They're getting information about what doesn't work.
Totally. And I think that still informs what does work.
Awesome. Last two questions. What instructionals are you watching right now? I know you're big into instructionals, as am I.
Yeah.
What are you watching?
Yeah, it's been, I definitely haven't had time to watch as much as I used to, but lately I think that I've been sort of watching, I think at your recommendation a while back, I was watching Danaher's, what is it? Fastest way to increase submission. I think which is like basically basically a back DVD, right?
Basically.
I think that helped. Yeah, I think that helped me a lot. And then I've actually been going through a lot of Judy's material, because I find that he has like quite interesting novel stuff that he seemed to have proven to like make it work at a really high level. And I just think not a lot of people do things the same way he does. So I find his stuff to be a bit refreshing for sure. And Jason Rao, I've been watching a lot of Jason Rao. So hot right now.
So hot right now. What is there any DVDs that really stick out in your mind? I'm still calling them DVDs. They're not. Any instructionals that stick out as particularly useful, or like your favorite instructionals, the ones that have helped you the most?
I kind of always go back to, yeah, there's so many that have been really helpful. Like, I think, like Power Ride from Craig Jones has helped me a lot. I like that one a lot. But I think for, just thinking historically, like certain, at the time, at the stage I was at, when I watched them, like how they affected my game and how they sort of helped me progress. I think Danaher's, like the beginning of the New Wave series, like the, I think Positional Escape or Submission Escape from
those
Danaher,
are awesome.
Like, that one did so much, because I think that one also had a bunch of offense. Like, because it was about like getting out of defense but into offensive cycles. So there's actually like a lot of offense and defense in the same instructional, and it helped me a lot. Yeah. So that one I think is probably one of my favorites. And I think it was actually, if I'm not mistaken, one of the first instructionals post like Laughlin's backside 50-50 Renaissance that like had Danaher's version of like the backside instruction information.
It wasn't in his enter the system leg locks.
Yeah, so that was the first time that he showed any sort of like backside stuff. So I think that was like really, it changed a lot for me at the time. Yeah.
Awesome. Who's your favorite instructor?
Matt Kwan.
I knew you'd fucking say that.
No, actually, though.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for filleting me on my own show. It's great.
Like instructional, I don't know. What's my favorite? I mean, Danaher's done so much for my game, so like it's hard for me to not say Danaher. I think so many guys are super useful. I mean, I've relied so much on like Rob Bernanke stuff as well, right? And like Lachlan, I think has a lot of good information. Those are like, common. I think someone who's really underrated is John Calistine. I think he has like really, really good information that maybe isn't really seen as like in that same conversation, but like he has really good stuff, and he actually makes it very digestible too. So.
I think another really underrated instructor is Ethan Krelliston. He's got some really cool stuff.
He's got some really good stuff.
He's got some really original stuff that like you don't see other people show. Really like his stuff. That's all I got for you, John. Thanks for the awesome interview. Do you have any products, anything you want to talk about? Maybe your gym, obviously.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't really have any products, but just come train if you're in the Vancouver area. We're in East Van, 4259 Fraser Street. All right, so near Fraser and 26. Just come train.
Yep, and that is Nimbus Grappling, and I highly recommend it. Again, I'll just John puffed me off, so I'll puff him off for a second here. John's done a lot for me in terms of actually showing me a lot of great stuff. I always credit him as being like one of the best coaches that I've ever seen, and he's very good at just making everyone around him better. So that's my plug of John and his school. If I was in the area, that's 100% where I'd be training. He's always got like cool new things that he's working with that he shows me. I'm like, holy fuck! I just like a piece of information that I can use right away. Jon Chan is your guy. So thank you so much, John, for being an awesome friend and training partner, and also thanks for doing the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
All right, guys, so check out the links in the bottom if you want to support the show. Other than that, remember, Everyday Jiu Jitsu Podcast is everything you need to know about Jiu Jitsu. See you later.